His was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's the thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told, keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project, the podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. My name is Chris Kretz. I am your host, and our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. If you've been listening for a while, just about a year ago, we came out with episode 140, speaking with Primo Fiore and his son Mario about Primo's life as one of the most well-known square dance callers on Long Island. And what became apparent in that interview is that Primo was the latest in a long legacy of square dancing, not only on Long Island, but in New York State and around the country. He was introduced to the field by a family called the Durlachers. So today we are returning to the topic, learning some more steps in the long history of square dancing, going to the source, speaking with the first family, and today's very special guest.
Yeah, hi. My name's Glen Durlacher. I am the grandson of Ed Durlacher and the son of also the square dance caller Don Durlacher.
Glenn, first of all, thank you for talking with us. This follows up on a conversation we had after I talked with Primo Fiore. So in terms of the Durlacher story, you mentioned it at the top there. Do you want to tell us what the family business was, what your father and grandfather were involved in?
Yeah, well, in the early 30s, not sure exactly what year, my grandfather, someone talked him into starting to call square dances. It was the Depression, and he had 5 children, so it was quite an undertaking. And for what I understand, it might have been the Top Hands, who was his band, that talked him into it.
Where was he living at the time, or where was the family at?
He was in Freeport, New York.
And was he part of the band, or the Top Hands were performers, I guess?
No, they were separate bands. Yeah, they were separate band.
Okay. And I don't know if you know from stories, or did your grandfather sort of have a good voice, or what do you think that led them to believe he would be good at it?
I have no idea. I don't know, really.
Okay.
He just had he was kind of small in stature. I think he was only maybe 5'5" or 5'6", but he had quite an outgoing personality, very sales kind of oriented, and so he decided to make a go of it, I guess.
So what do you know about the early days? Like, where was he calling? Were they doing it on Long Island first, or did he go into the city? Or
yeah, he started. I believe he started on Long Island, and let's see. Well, I know he started a record company. It was called Honor Your Partners Records in the late 30s, or it might have been like 35. And the Honor Your Partner Records was it was designed to teach grade school children in schools how to square dance. So I believe there was, I think maybe 10 albums that he wrote along with a book. And he started traveling around the country, introducing himself to phys ed departments in school districts and selling the album. And by 39, he got so popular, he actually became friends with Robert Moses, who was obviously one of the biggest builders in New York State, so well known on Long Island. Anyway, in 39, he started calling square dances at the New York World's Fair that summer. And then also afterwards is when Moses asked him to come and start calling square dances at Jones Beach. That was in the summer of 1940. So he called square dances there, and then in 45, he also became friendly with the head of Pepsi in Flushing. Then he started calling square dances in Central Park, which Pepsi actually sponsored him. They got so much Pepsi. My father, I'm surprised he had perfect teeth. But not only was he traveling around the country, but then he also, during the summers, he was calling dances at Jones Beach and also in Central Park. At Central Park, they said it was some kind of world record. I think they had like 5,000 dancers, I believe, for what I've heard. And you can actually, if you pull on YouTube and you Google square dancing Central Park 1945, you'll see my grandfather come up, surrounded by Pepsi logos. And so, again, he was traveling all over the country, promoting his book and promoting his records. My kids from Albany, New York, their grade school actually had his records. So he called dances all over New York State, all over the country, until he died in 61 or 62. And then my father started calling. He took over the calling at Jones Beach and called there to thousands of people for. So my grandfather called for 22 years, and then my father called for another 16 till he died in 1978. Then my father's friend, who my father taught how to call, Primo Fiore from Deer Park, took over and called until 2004.
And I think you were telling me that was like the longest continual event at that arena at Jones Beach.
Yeah, it was the longest continuous event at the Jones Beach Bandshell, 64 years.
And I guess that would be over the summer, I guess?
Yeah, every summer on Thursday nights.
Thursday nights. What did you ever try your hand at it?
I have not, though I can call a couple dances, being around it all my life, and listen to my father's records.
Well, I was going to ask you just from your memories, what was it like growing up? Like, when do you first remember seeing the cowboy boots and shirts and like what's your earliest memory of being at a square dance?
I guess as early as I can remember, probably I'm 3 years old. As far back as my memory goes, I remember being at Jones Beach, watching my grandfather call, and the top hands were playing behind him.
You shared some great pictures, so it's amazing to see the crowds and just the way they dressed. For me, like back then, there's a lot of big, loud shirts and dresses and what they were wearing. So it looks like they drew big crowds. What can you say about the crowds you remember seeing?
Oh, yeah, it was huge. I don't know how many sets. I think they would have, like, sometimes they'd have 50 sets, and they I don't know what year they had record numbers of sets. But one thing interesting is that, so around 1985, my father, I guess, had been dead about 5 or 6 years. There was a newspaper article in Newsday, and it was kind of a weekly article showcasing what Long Island celebrities liked about Long Island. And there, behold, was a picture of Ben and Jerry's saying the best thing about Long Island was square dancing to Don Durlacher and the Top Hands, which was kind of funny because, like, as it would be, that they would be about 5 years older than me. I'm 65. So as a kid, I remember this kind of hippie bunch that used to hang out on the other side of the bleachers. So not hippies, but, older kids that used to come every week. So I'm assuming it was them because they had come for years. I'm actually in the middle of trying to contact them about some things that I'm trying to do at Jones Beach.
Yeah, well, and I talked with Primo Fiore and his son, and just he tells stories of meeting people he's called dances for their mother and their father, and then for the kids, and so it's a multi-generational experience. It sounds like, this square dancing.
Oh yeah. Well, for 65 years, that's a long.
That's a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is a lot of people. People would come back again every year to dance.
Yeah, so just a few stray questions. When he was traveling in the 30s and the 40s, were the Top Hens with him most of the time, or did he travel with other backing bands? Or
No, he would just travel with records
okay,
and PA systems. He would do dances around the New York area with the Top Hens, like at Central Park.
so would you, when you were at would you actually do the dances too, or did you usually just watch from the?
Oh no, I danced. Yeah, no, I danced all the time. You know, when I was, I guess, old enough, maybe 4 or 5 years old, until my father passed away. You know, and then I did go to dance after my father died, with Primo Fiore.
And did either your father or grandfather ever talk to you about like what the secret was, or what made a good caller, or any of their strategy about how to do it? Or
Yeah, I think because many of the people that they taught a lot of people to dance that never had danced before. So you had to have clear instructions, clear, simple instructions to people to understand. And that was one thing my father and grandfather kind of were masters at, because you're trying to get people to move in a certain direction. So you have to be quite explicit as to what you're trying to train them to do or teach them to do.
and it's very formal, like you're saying, a lot of instructions. Like in the pictures, people are bowing to each other, and I would imagine in the 60s was a very different kind of dancing from what the teenagers were doing, or the popular culture.
Oh yeah, well it was even at Jones Beach you had to have, it was dress attire. You know, like back then, women had to wear dresses, and even men, they were saying you couldn't wear bathing suits because you're at the beach. You weren't allowed to wear bathing suits or flip flops. They actually had guards, like with white coats and these like sailors' hats, uniforms to make sure that people came on and off the floor safely. But you were allowed Bermuda shorts, couldn't wear sandals. So even during the summer, we were wearing long pants, dancing.
Wait, can you say a little bit more about the records? So did they have the record factory or the pressing plant in Freeport, or do you know anything about like where did they keep all the records? Or
well, educational activities was at a Freeport, and that actually got taken over by my cousins, and they turned it into educational activities. Educational activities, I believe, was in business for, I don't know when they changed the name, but they were in business for about another 50 or 60 years.
do you still have any of the records yourself?
Oh yeah, yeah. I still have many of the records. Actually, I have all of the records.
Okay, great.
You know, so.
And any other stories of? I was talking to Primo, and he was complaining about the mosquitoes. Depending on which way the wind at Jones Beach was coming from, you'd get a lot of mosquitoes. But and any stories of tough gigs your father or grandfather had, or anything strange that might have happened during a dance?
No, but one thing about being a grandson and the son of the square dance caller, you know, my father, I was just so proud of them. You know, here's my father and grandfather being the center of attention, and for years calling to all these people, and it was so very, very proud. You know, I felt like I was like sort of a son of a rock star. So
Yeah, great. Would they be recognized like walking around town, or?
oh yeah, he'd be recognized all over. You know, yeah, he'd be recognized all over. But well, my father actually, he really did a lot of like workshops, calling workshops at school districts during the school year. Half Hollow Hills, so he'd do all the elementary schools. So he would actually go and call, though he also had records, but he would go and call and teach to phys ed departments.
So do you remember when you were in school doing gym, were you doing square dancing in gym too?
Yeah, I did it too. Yeah, I remember my father coming to school and and calling dances. Yeah, at the Hill School in on Deer Park Avenue.
And just since we like to talk about Long Island history, anything, so what comes to mind just of your hometown or when you were growing up, what sticks in your mind? Maybe what's different now or some things that are not here anymore, just from your own memories.
Yeah, well, years ago, the Hill School that I went to grade school at, I was doing some research and found out it was one of the first schools to be erected by this new Half Hollow Hills, it was called, or Halfway Hollow Hills, when the population started to grow in the 30s, when people started moving out from Brooklyn. And it was interesting. The Hill School was, I guess, the first, I think it started in 32. So its first graduating class was, I think, 33. And one of my friend's fathers was in the first graduating class in 33. I also found out that, well, it's called Half Hollow Hills, but it used to be called Halfway Hollow Hills because halfway between Straight Path, I lived off a Straight Path where there were hills, and then the other hills were up by Burrs Lane. So the hollow was where this expressway was built. So then it was shortened to Half Hollow.
Okay.
And that Dick's Hills, where I grew up, Dick was a Native American who had actually a wigwam up in Huntington Station. So,
do you remember seeing that?
No,
that still
no,
there?
I just read about it.
The story.
No, I just read it. Yeah, read about it like a couple of years ago. Here I am, 65, and you're finding out all this information and history about the island.
So again, just to ask you a few questions about that time. So when you were growing up, how crowded was it? Did it feel built up, or did it feel still kind of like the country to you?
Well, we originally were living in Deer Park. I was in Deer Park till I was 5 or 6, and then we moved to Dick's Hills, about 5 miles away. But it was still woods. We lived off of Concord Street, and it was still miles of woods and potato farms. This is in the summer of 63. But it was still quite rural back then. We lived on a dead-end block where there was miles of woods.
And so for both your father and your grandfather, was this their full-time job, or was it like a side gig?
No, it was the full-time job. Yeah, it was the full-time job.
What I found interesting talking to Primo, a lot of the music he used at one point was like almost calypso music. He talks about using Montego Bay. And what do you remember, or what can you say about the actual music? Was it country music that your grandfather started with, or was he mixing in other types of music for calling?
Yeah, it was more country. Red River Valley was popular. Yankee Doodle was popular. My father had his own albums, and he did like more Jamaican, some Jamaican songs like Kingston Town was one of my favorites. Then he actually did a Carpenters when he had his own dances, did like a takeoff on one of the Carpenters songs, and even more popular music actually.
Okay. Do you know what happened to the Top Hand guys? You ever hear is there still a version of the Top Hand band out there, or Top Hands?
Honestly, I don't know. But the band, the Top Hands, were calling from Primo, and then when I would go visit during the summer and go dance, I knew them, and they would come and say hi to me and would tell me how much, like my father meant to them and my grandfather. Some of them had passed away at that point because they'd been with my grandfather. So by the mid '60s, a couple of them were already passed away.
Were they Freeport guys? Do you know?
I don't know where they were from. I think they were all from all over the island, but they were in a musicians union. There's actually a union, musicians union.
And for some reason, I'm fascinated. Again, the pictures you sent of the fashion, the clothes. Any chance your grandfather passed down some of those great cowboy shirts they were wearing? And he's got one with like big cactuses on it, cacti.
I don't have any clothes, but I have like my grandfather's drum, and I have one of my father's PA speakers, and I also have one of the seahorse medallions from Jones Beach. In the back of the dance shell, there was 3 4-foot diameter blue seahorse big medallions that were decorations behind the dance shell. So when it was refinished, or they restored it, I think around 1980, I actually have one. And I have all the prep books from my father and mainly from my grandfather.
You know, the one thing I found when I was talking to Primo, I had to do some research. And so I don't know if you found this or people have reached out to you, but seems to be a lot of people that study square dancing history. Does that surprise you, or have you heard from people asking about your family's legacy?
I have had historians. My grandfather was known around the world, actually. He traveled even to Germany to call dances, and England and Germany. And I was actually contra dancing up in the Saratoga area where I live now. And one of the callers said, "We're going to do a square dance." His name was Paul Rosenberg. Anyway, he goes, "Well, we're going to do a square dance, and it's called Red River Valley." I'm thinking to myself, my grandfather's song, and probably haven't heard that in 55 years. Anyway, after the dance was done, I went up to him and I said, "Whose dance was that?" And he said, "Oh, that's Red River Valley. It was by the famous Ed Durlacher." I said, "Paul, that was my grandfather." He was mortified. Just couldn't believe it. And like subsequently, like 4 or 5 months later, if I was in another dance he was calling, he would stop the dance or actually call that square dance again, and single me out and tell the story about how Glen's grandfather Ed had inspired him to start calling. So I thought that was, because of the records.
That's great. What would you and your family, what do you think you want people to remember about the Durlachers?
About how talented they were and how much joy they gave to people through dancing. Like my grandfather all over the country, and through his and still through his records even today, they're still being utilized today. I think even with Ben and Jerry's, they went for years. That kind of dancing is just so much fun, and also because whole families would dance together. Just kids, 4 or 5 would even be dancing. So it was all generations would be on the dance floor, which is different with other different kind of dancing now. It was kind of more family oriented, and it was pretty special to be, to be related to them and to witness it.
And thanks again to Glen for speaking with me. We were on Zoom for these recordings. If you are interested in helping Glen and the Durlacher family bring more attention to the history of square dancing at Jones Beach, they're trying to get some commemorative mentions set up at the Bandshell. You can write to New York State Parks Regional Headquarters, 625 Belmont Avenue, West Babylon, New York, 11704. If you or your family remembers going to square dancing, if it was a part of your summer life, if you want to help support this important part of local history and Jones Beach history, let them know it. We'll check back with Glen to see how that's going. I can tell you that Ben and Jerry have written in with their support. They do remember those nights dancing with the Durlachers, so Check our show notes at longislandhistoryproject.org for more information, including links to square dancing history sites. There are historians of dancing and square dancing. Once you start going down this path, it is a fascinating part of American history. Our outro music is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution 4.0 international license. So when the music is ended, that will be the end of another episode, but as always, thank you for listening.